Hello, everyone, and welcome to our weekly cyber threat intelligence briefing. Today is July 24th, and we'll be covering the most recent trends that our threat intelligence team is witnessing in the trenches. My name is Keith Wojcicki, Global Head of Threat Intelligence for Kroll. This week, we're joined by Associate Managing Director Lori Iacono, Senior Vice President George Glass, Vice President Dave Truman, Vice President Mukesh Nagar, and Senior Associate Ryan Hicks, all from our cyber threat intel team. We'll be covering the following trends that our team is concentrating on. We have Citrix, the 0-day, WormGPT, it's always an interesting one, FAKESG, Ryan, ColdFusion vulnerability, and Ransomware Round-up from Lori. So I'm going to turn it over to Mukesh to talk about Citrix. Mukesh?
Thank you, Keith. Hello, everyone. So Citrix recently released a security bulletin highlighting several vulnerabilities affecting their NetScaler ADC and NetScaler Gateway products. These products were previously called Citrix ADC and Citrix Gateway. Customers using Citrix Managed Cloud Services or Citrix Managed Adaptive Authentications are not affected by the vulnerability. However, the most critical vulnerability highlighted here was CVE 2023-3519. This has been found to be exploited in the wild, making it a serious security concern for users. The vulnerability allows for unauthenticated remote code execution on the endpoint. Within the bulletin, Citrix also released two other vulnerabilities. These were CVE 2023-3466 and CVE 2023-3467. CVE 2023-3466 is a reflected cross-site scripting vulnerability which impacts both Citrix ADC and Citrix Gateway products. For an attacker to exploit this, they would need the victim to access a specific link under their control while connected to a network that has connectivity to the NetScaler IP. CVE 2023-3467 is a privilege escalation to root administrator NSRoot vulnerability. This requires an authenticated access to NSIP or SNIP with management interface access. On Shodan, at the time of writing the report, we observed over 59,000 Citrix NetScaler devices that were available on the internet globally and potentially impacted by these vulnerabilities. A user that goes by D0RB on GitHub has written a Python script to help organizations check if they are vulnerable to these if they are vulnerable. The tool examines the HTTP header to see when the last update was performed and on the device and reports back whether you might be potentially vulnerable or not. Just to note out here, this tool doesn't confirm if you have been compromised or tries to exploit the vulnerability in order to check if the device is vulnerable. It just checks when the last update was taken in place for the devices. In order to safeguard systems, Citrix has recommended upgrading the appliances to one of the supported versions as displayed on the table on screen. Just to also note, if you're using NetScaler ADC or NetScaler Gateway version 12.1, these have become end of life and are susceptible of these risks. Citrix has recommended updating these products and getting them replaced. Back over to you, Keith.
Thanks, Mukesh. We'll turn it over to George to talk about the WormGPT. George?
Thank you very much, Keith. So WormGPT is a new tool that has been making the rounds in the news recently, generating a lot of attention and chatter. It originally started off being sold on the underground market, but is now recently, with its own Twitter account, being sold openly on the ClearNet as well. The tool is essentially a GPT style chatbot, but it is significantly more expensive than a ChatGPT subscription. So you can see on the right there some of their marketing material, indicating that it costs €100 monthly, or for the low price of €5,000, you can have your own private instance set up. WormGPT, it sort of goes beyond the traditional ChatGPT and other chatbot jailbreaks and super prompts, which we've written about before on the Kroll blog, which basically enables potentially malicious actors to bypass some of the safeguards that are in place for ChatGPT that won't generally give you malicious code. That is possible, but this particular project has been built from scratch, according to the actor, built using the GPT-J open source large language model. And apparently it's also been additionally trained on malware samples and other cybersec topics as well. So this particular model, again, according to the threat actor, sort of negates the knowledge cutoff that ChatGPT has. It's capable of generating malicious code, and as an example, again, this is taken from the marketing material provided by the actor on an underground forum for a very sort of simple malware Python script. It's very capable of generating more complex code than this, but I think this is just sort of an indication that there aren't any of those safeguards in place. Additionally, it's also designed to aid in the use of business email compromise attacks, maybe for those actors that don't speak English to a high degree, and they need sort of the assistance of this particular model. And as you can see here, it's given a pretty good and convincing template in order to conduct fraudulent purchases or invoicing. So what do we think about this? What's our analysis of WormGPT? Well, for those actors that can afford to, this sort of continues the democratization of cybercrime somewhat. It does lower the barrier to entry for generating those malicious code snippets, generating these emails and so on and so forth. But of course, this does come with a pretty significant price tag. For the same sort of price on the underground market, you could buy access to a botnet or something like that, or fish kits. So it really remains to be seen whether we are going to see a lot of this particular type of tool being used in the underground economy. But nevertheless, we will keep a very close eye on it and continue to monitor any activity surrounding it. And that's all from me. Back over to you, Keith.
Thanks, George. Appreciate it. Yeah, this is a new one. We definitely want to keep an eye on for sure. Ryan, I'm going to turn over to you.
Thanks, Keith. Hi, everyone. So a new fake update campaign has been reported, named FAKESG. And the name really comes from the fact that it shows a number of similarities to the well-documented SOC Gaulish attacks. So as a setup for the campaign, the threat actor injects code into a compromised website, commonly WordPress sites, which then contains well-crafted templates for various browser update pages, including Chrome, Edge, and Firefox. So on the right is the Chrome update law, so quite sophisticated looking template with all the kind of relevant aspects, including kind of the diagnostic or the tick box there for user data. So looking quite a good law. The webpage appears to be kind of an upgrade, really visually, to similar SOC Gaulish update laws. Another difference is the FAKESG code injected into the webpage is all kind of self-contained within the webpage itself, and it doesn't require further requests to retrieve image files before rendering, which was the case, appears to be the case in SOC Gaulish campaigns. So upon clicking the update button on the fake page, a URL file is downloaded, which when opened will retrieve a .hga file, which is a HTML application file. So this file is downloaded from an adversary controlled server. So the first real stage where the victim is, or the victim machine is then contacting a adversary infrastructure. So when the victim attempts to run that HTA file, they're presented with a pop-up warning whether they want to run that file as it's been unverified. So you see the security warning example at the bottom there. And the HTA file will then execute PowerShell, which in turn downloads net support, which is a remote access Trojan, also observed in SOC Gaulish campaigns. So again, a crossover, but then several differences. And due to the subtle changes in those kind of post-execution TTPs between FAKESG and SOC Gaulish, SOC Gaulish kind of did rely on JavaScript files, whereas FAKESG is the URL and HTA combo. And so we've engaged with our detection engineering team, and they've confirmed that we do have, in fact, have a number of detections already in place surrounding HTA files that can detect this particular activity. And just to note on the social engineering side, although FAKESG uses sort of seemingly more visually sophisticated lures compared to other campaigns, there are several kind of key clues for a victim, I guess, to pick up on the fact that this is not legitimate. Firstly, the URL of the fake page will likely not appear anything like the legitimate vendor update page. As I mentioned, the threat actor will be first compromising a website. So that compromised website URL will be the one in the browser rather than the legitimate kind of Chrome update or Edge update URL. And secondly, as I mentioned, if the victim runs the HTA file, the prompt appears which may or should possibly raise suspicion, again, that something that they're opening is not coming from a legitimate source. You can see from the picture at the bottom, it shows the kind of IP address, and it certainly doesn't appear to come from a Chrome or a legitimate browser download. So the recommendations, of course, what I mentioned about social engineering being kind of the user guidance, and then installing EDR for the detection side. And that's all for me. Back to Keith.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it, Ryan. I'm going to pass it over to Dave for a new vulnerability. Dave?
Yep, thank you. Rapid7 released a report stating they had detected threat actors exploiting vulnerabilities in Adobe's ColdFusion to detect web shells. The key vulnerability exploited is a 9.8 criticality, which Adobe had previously released a patch for. Rapid7 claims the exploitation mirrored a now taken down blog post made by Project Discovery that is still available via Google Cache. Rapid7 believed that the Project Discovery had unknowingly published a bypass for Adobe's patch as part of their proof of concept code exploit for the patched vulnerability. That is to say, the proof of concept for the known vulnerability inadvertently worked against the patched version, and thus technically a new 0-day. Adobe has now addressed this with an out-of-bounds patch. The vulnerability in question is a Java deserialization vulnerability, a type of vulnerability where an attacker can supply input to an application that tricks the application into running certain code objects from within the various libraries the application is configured with. If the certain objects are available, the attacker might be able to use one or more of them in a chain to achieve remote execution. These objects are nicknamed gadgets. This means that for this type of vulnerability to be exploited, both the vulnerability that allows an attacker to manipulate Java objects they should not have access to, and Java objects that can be manipulated to obtain a benefit are present in the application. Adobe's patch didn't directly fix the vulnerability that allowed attackers to manipulate the Java objects, but instead attempted to block exploitation by denying access to specific gadgets via a block list. This is conceptually the easiest solution because it does not fundamentally alter the application. It just checks for a list and then allows an object to run based on that list. However, for it to be fully plug the hole, it requires finding all known and unknown gadgets in the application. In the past, this has led to vendors releasing a series of patches for essentially the same vulnerability in short order. In this case, the researcher investigating the deserialization vulnerability unknowingly chose a gadget that Adobe hadn't blocked and therefore would exploit both the patched and unpatched versions. Rapid7 notes that this blog post has been taken down shortly after having been made, and this blog might have been the source of the attacker's knowledge. However, when we were investigating the article written by Rapid7, we found that Project Discovery had also added a vulnerability scan script for this vulnerability using the new gadget, to their GitHub repository for their popular open source scanner, Nuclei. On testing, we found that the default run of the scanner against a remote host would execute this script, meaning between the time of the blog post and the out-of-bands Adobe patch, malicious actors had access to a vulnerability scanner that included a script to scan for a 0-day and code that could be adapted for malicious exploitation. For users of ColdFusion, we recommend making sure your ColdFusion instances are fully patched. For organizations in general, it is a good idea to have a period of heightened awareness on any software that's had a recent critical vulnerability, as often more issues with that software are found shortly afterwards. And for organizations who develop software, it is important for development teams to have access to people who fully understand vulnerabilities to help mitigate the risk of vulnerable code or incomplete patches and fixes, either with knowledgeable internal staff or utilizing the services of code reviewers with strong security knowledge, such as those provided by Kroll's malware analysis group. Thank you. Keith?
Thank you so much, Dave. Dave, really appreciate it. Now to wrap it up, we're going to send over to Lori for the ransomware roundup. Lori?
Thanks, Keith. So I would say the theme of this week's ransomware roundup is everything old is new again. As you see, we're going to talk about two different, some activity that we've seen previously in some shape or form. So the first one is a potential rebrand of the ransomware as a service operation Abaddon. And this new strain is being called No Escape. And it was observed for the first time in June 2023, and analysis of that particular strain indicates that it bears significant code resemblance to Abaddon. So many security researchers, as I said, are concluding that this is likely a rebrand of Abaddon itself. It's almost identical to the old Abaddon, except for the algorithm it uses for encryption. Abaddon was using AES, and this new version is using Salsa 20. It has been observed targeting victims with double extortion attacks. So they're both exfiltrating data. They're going after Windows, Linux, and VMware XE servers. And they have been observed demanding up to $10 million for ransom. So, a little bit about the Abaddon ransomware gang, for those who may not remember. That group was very active in 2020, 2021. They notoriously shut down their operations, supposedly of their own accord, after the United States and Australia both post warnings about that particular group. In Kroll's, there's not a lot of research right now about the vectors that No Escape ransomware is using to get into systems. But if we're going by what Abaddon has done historically, Kroll had observed that external remote services and using valid accounts were two of the most common initial access techniques we saw with that group. And also something else that Abaddon was known for, and it's unclear whether or not No Escape will do the same thing. Abaddon was one of the first groups to start including DDoS attacks on victim organizations during their negotiation tactics. If we go over to the next slide, another one that's using some malware that we've previously seen. So security research have identified that actors associated with the cybercrime group FEN8 are delivering Black Hat and or Alpha V ransomware. So FEN8, this is a very well-known financially motivated crime group that's been active since 2016. Most of those early attacks from that group were related to point-of-sale malware, so really focused on stealing payment card information as a way to make money for that group. They started, like many other of these groups, to pivot to ransomware in the kind of ransomware boom of 2019, 2020. They've previously been observed launching Ragnarlocker and White Rabbit ransomware, but the latest iteration has some from this group delivering Black Hat and Alpha V. And what they've been doing is using a new variant of a legacy malware that the group has used, Sardonic. And this particular malware was previously observed and analyzed in 2021. The new version that's being observed kind of takes some of the utility of the old version, but has added more features that are helping obfuscate it once it's on a network. And as I said before, Fin8 formerly was kind of in that point of sale malware. That's not dissimilar to Fin11, which is known right now for the CLOP activity. That group was also another one that kind of started out going after payment card data and pivoted to ransomware, kind of highlighting how these financial crime groups are really seeing ransomware as a opportunistic way to make financial gain. And that's all I have for the ransomware roundup today.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Lori. Really appreciate it. And a big thank you to everybody that has taken the time to tune in to Kroll's weekly threat intelligence briefing. We do hope you found this session informative, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day and make sure you turn into next week. Thanks so much.